Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's nice to see you again, my dear followers, and I hope you're going to enjoy the subject we're going to discuss today. Today, I'm not going to talk about books. I'm going to concentrate on a couple of science fiction movies. Both these movies have been directed by the very famous Ridley Scott, famous English director who has produced one of the most famous sci-fi movies of all time. I'm referring to Alien, which was produced in 1979, 45 years ago, and to the prequel to this very famous movie, which is called Prometheus. This was actually produced in 2012, sometime after the original movie. The prequel, well, it speaks for itself. It actually takes place before the events in Alien. And we have to go back 27 years in history from Alien itself to enjoy the events in the second movie. Ridley Scott has the most incredible credentials as a movie director, and I believe he has a special place as a director of sci-fi movies. He's produced two of the most famous sci-fi movies of all time. First of all, Alien, which we're going to discuss now. In 1982, 1972, he also released Blade Runner, which is an adaptation of the American sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick's to Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. The book was an incredible success, and the movie was an incredible success as well. So Scott has two very, very famous sci-fi movies to his credit: Alien and Blade Runner. Uh, Alien was a groundbreaking movie, and it was actually starring a lady called Sigourney Weaver, who's become a very famous actress now. She's in her 70s now. I believe she's about 73 years old. When she appeared in Alien, she was an unknown actress, and this movie propelled her to stardom. Not only did she put in a remarkable performance in the movie, but it set her up to sign a deal to appear in three sequels of the movie. None of these sequels was directed by Ridley Scott, but it certainly made her a very well-known actress, and she's obviously made a lot of money from appearing in those films. She never appeared in Prometheus, which, as I said earlier, was filmed in 2012, but it did propel her career. So she's a very famous Hollywood actress now. I'm not sure if she still works, but she's appeared in many, many different movies. Um, Alien is a very difficult film to beat. Um, it's a one-off, really, and it's a perfect gothic horror story. We don't normally think of science fiction subjects as gothic horror, but the theme is very closely based on old gothic horror movies and stories where groups of people are trapped in houses. Perhaps these houses are halfway up mountains, they could be on remote islands, they're in some remote part of the countryside, and there's always something rather strange going on in these houses, or it may be inhabited by a madman with an axe or somebody who's going to really scare us as the movie goes on. Quite often, these movies entail a plot where the villain of the piece systematically kills off the other characters in the movie. Gradually, one by one, they disappear. They may be strangled, they may be poisoned, they may be shot, but they all mysteriously disappear. And this is a very old theme in Gothic movies, the dusty old house, the castle with the ghosts, the murky dark corners, the eerie noises, the isolated castles, ruined monasteries in dense forests, and strange going ons halfway up mountains or on remote islands. We're also introduced in Gothic to the paranormal, to the abhuman creatures, the spooky stuff. It's all very, very scary. This is the classic stuff of the Gothic horror movie, the Gothic horror novel. So Ridley Scott and his script writers have very successfully transferred this kind of theme to a spaceship. Uh, there are a group of people on the spaceship. There's not a very big crew. One of them, in actual fact, turns out to be a robot and is extinguished by the crew who aren't destroyed by the fearful creature that gets on board. But there's a very kind of spooky sense on the spaceship. The name of the spaceship is the Nostromo, and it's designed for mining and transportation. And we're treated to views of the spaceship. It's extraordinary metallic hull inside, miles of steel pipes, electric cables, computers with pages of data flickering on screens. And this is a kind of new style compared to the old dusty castle with the maniac with the knife. So what happens is two of the crew go on an expedition after receiving a distress call from an unknown planet. And they land on this unknown planet and they find a crashed spaceship and a skeleton of a huge humanoid character. And he's a big guy, a really big guy, much bigger than we humans in this day and age. And he's largely forgotten, actually. This guy was called the engineer. He was largely forgotten in the rest of this film. But Ridley Scott resurrected this guy in Prometheus in 2012. Then he's essential to the plot in that movie. But in the first movie, you see him more or less at the beginning of the film, and then you don't see much of him at all. But two of the crew try to have a look around the spaceship where he landed, the crashed spaceship, and they find a compartment with a lot of huge eggs. And suddenly a creature jumps out of one of these eggs and manages to get down the throat of one of the explorers. So once this creature has got down inside the body of the crew member, there's very serious trouble for the spaceship because eventually a kind of creature incubates inside this person, and there's a really gory scene where it suddenly bursts from his chest. Not a very big creature at the time, but it races off and rapidly grows into a very big monster. And at this point, turns on the crew and destroys them one by one. One of the crew turns out to be a robot, and the human members of the crew actually destroy the robot. But the entire crew, apart from Ripley, played by Weaver, and the cute little cat Jonesy, they're the only survivors. Towards the end of the movie, she manages to jettison this ghastly creature out of an airlock, so he disappears off into space. But this is a very typical Gothic theme. Um, the spaceship, the Nostromus, is gloomy. It's full of shadows. The whole place is very, very claustrophobic. The spaceship, obviously, it's in extreme isolation. It's miles and miles away from humanity, miles from any planet. So there's a tremendous atmosphere of fear of the unknown. The hypertension within the crew mounts and mounts. And when you get that kind of tension, it doesn't take long for it to develop into paranoia. And people are creeping about, wondering where this ghastly creature is going to strike next. The psychological tension is pretty amazing. Scott does a really classic job on scaring us, and the tension is actually could be cut by a knife. The actual point of the story is, well, they have to fight this beast. Um, if somebody doesn't defeat it, it's going to be a matter of extinction. So the basis for this movie, I feel, it's an exercise in psychological terror. And as I've mentioned before, this has taken place in old houses, in theatres sometimes, in ecclesiastical buildings like monasteries and churches. But this time it's transferred to a spaceship miles and miles from anywhere. Uh, at the time, they had a wonderful advertising slogan for this movie, and it said, "In space, nobody can hear you scream." So this was the perfect advertising slogan for this movie because they were really on their own. Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, she manages to outwit the creature in the end. And towards the end of the movie, you see her with the cute little cat, and they go into stasis in order to get back to Earth. Wonderful story, very old formula, and a very different kind of movie to the prequel. Prometheus is a very different kind of movie altogether. It's not a classical Gothic movie, it's more a horror story. And uh, the original intention of flying from Earth to the planet where the action takes place is to try and find man's origins. Was man really created on Earth? Or was he created on another planet and was brought to Earth? Or was he the seed of some experiment that was brought to Earth? Or were these godlike creatures who turned out to be the engineers, um, the same kind of people as the guy with the broken skeletal figure in Alien? Were these people some sort of gods, or were they people who could do genetic engineering and they created the human race? Uh, it's a very different kind of film because it deals with those kind of issues. And the whole purpose of the expedition on the Prometheus is to go and find the origins of human life. Um, it may conflict very strongly with religions on Earth, with holy books. But let's not forget that Prometheus came from a very ancient religion. He was part of the Titans, the race of the Titans. And in Greek mythology, he actually created the human race. So this is where we get our title, Prometheus. But the whole expedition is to try and find the origin of the species. There's two young doctors who happen to be lovers. Um, the young woman is Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw. She's determined to find out the origins of the human race. And her boyfriend, Charlie, he's an archaeologist. He's kind of in the game for his interest in archaeology and for adventure. But she's a rather more spiritual person. She's trying to seek out the origin of our species. And this is why she's so keen to get to the planet, to what she originally thinks is the planet of the engineers, possibly the creators of the human race. This script raises all kinds of philosophical, ethical, and religious questions. Um, the creation of the human race on another planet is not a new phenomenon. It's been a matter of debate for several decades now in what we call New Age writers. Was the human race, did it develop here on planet Earth, or was it created somewhere else, or created on our own planet here by a species that happened to be visiting and they created us while we were here? Uh, that's a tricky one, a very controversial one. I'm not going to opt for any particular answer to the problem. I invite you to think it over and you can send in your suggestions. So, a good question for people who are fond of religion, good question for the New Age people, or for scientific people who simply want to know the origin of the human race. Was it a project of evolution, as suggested by Charles Darwin in his Origin of the Species? Or is there a very different answer to our origin? Is it something different altogether? This is a rather different theme to the old Gothic theme in Alien, but it's a very exciting movie. I don't think it's going to be ever classified as a great science fiction movie. I don't think it's in the same league as Alien or Blade Runner, or shall we say, movies such as um, the Terminator franchise or the original Matrix trilogy. I don't think it's going to be classified as great movie as they are. But it's certainly not a bad movie at all. It's not badly done. The script is very good. There's some very interesting characters in it. And I think it's a very entertaining piece of work, but not a classic. I don't really like the term classic, but we'll say it's not a classic like Alien. There's one very interesting character in it called David. Now, David is a robot. We had a robot in Alien, and in Prometheus, we have a robot, a guy called David, as I've just said. Uh, on the journey from planet Earth to the star system where they think the engineers come from, David takes care of the spaceship and he checks on the human beings who are in stasis for the very long journey. Fortunately, nobody dies. Nobody dies on the journey, and they're all awakened successfully when they reach the planet. There are the two young scientists, Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Charlie, the two lovers. There is the captain of the craft, played by Idris Elba, plays a very good part in it. Um, we also have Charlize Theron, very lovely lady, who is really the controller of the whole expedition. And it turns out she is the daughter of the man who sponsors the multi-trillion, I say not multi-billion, but multi-trillion expedition to go and find the source of the human race. Uh, there was a lot of pre-release advertising a lot of it was kind of pseudo intellectual about finding the origin of the human race, um, the intellectual and the spiritual controversies that this may raise. But I think basically this is a monster movie. We've got some very nasty things appear right through, right from very slimy, minute pieces of bacteria and kind of snake-like creatures, which they find um, in a pyramid near where the spaceship lands. And towards the end of the movie, there's a very unpleasant creature, rather like a huge octopus. Um, Doctor Doctor Elizabeth, after having intercourse with her lover, Doctor Charlie, he impregnates her with sperms, but it turns out these sperms are infected by the bacteria on the planet. She finds she has a rather nasty creature growing in her womb. I think for me, the most ghastly part of this movie is where she performs a cesarean on herself. And I couldn't watch half of it, quite honestly. But it's a really ghastly scene. And there's some pretty ghastly scenes in this movie, but I think the cesarean makes the other scenes look like a picnic. Um, she has to butcher herself to get this very unpleasant creature out of her womb. And it develops into this kind of giant octopus, which we see at the end of the movie. And the giant octopus is actually fighting with one of the engineers. And eventually, the octopus overcomes the engineer. And lo and behold, right at the end of the movie, we get the creature from Alien, the xenomorph that emerges from the egg and from the guy's chest. Right at the end of the movie, we see the xenomorph. He stands up and he screams at us right at the end of the movie. It's great fun, this movie. Sometimes it's a bit overpowering with the noise and you can't hear the script. There's a lot of explosions, a lot of heavy music, a lot of shouting and screaming. At one stage, Dr. Charlie is actually killed by a flamethrower because he's infected. Um, it's all very ghastly, and the crew one by one disappear. And the captain and one of the crew they crash the spaceship into the engineer's spaceship to save it reaching Earth, contaminating Earth, and therefore destroying the human race. Um, so humanity is actually saved by the expedition that goes there to find the engineers. A very good theme, but as I say, I don't think it's a classic in the same way as Alien, but a very, very good movie. Um, Ridley Scott took it on knowing he was really going to have to beat a very good movie with Alien. And when his backers at 20th Century Fox hired him to do the new movie, they knew they had the best in the business. He was the master at Sci-Fi, and he produced another superb movie. But in my view, not a classic. But I'm going to leave it up to you to decide whether you think it's a classic. Um, yes, for me, Alien and Prometheus, very similar, but they're very different animals. And I'm afraid Ridley Scott didn't quite manage to upstage Ridley Scott, and it's not quite as good as the first movie. So, a couple of exciting movies. As far as I know, there's no books been made of these two particular stories, but a couple of very good movies, very exciting movies. As I said earlier, it propelled Sigourney Weaver to international stardom. Um, I think the franchise is now into double figures. the number of movies that have been made. And in 2024, this year, the year I'm speaking to you at the moment, there will be yet another movie produced. I've checked on the cast at the moment. They seem to be fairly unknown people, but I'm sure that won't last so long. They'll soon be very famous. And so the franchise marches on, and Ridley Scott, who I believe is well into his 80s now, I think he's 86 or 87, still is churning out very good movies, still a director to be beaten, very famous guy. I'm not saying all his movies are good. I'm not going to mention his bad ones today, but he's produced some bad ones. But for me, these two, a couple of wonderful movies, and Alien is one of the all-time greats of the sci-fi genre. No doubt about it at all. So, my dear followers, I hope you've enjoyed my little summary of these two films, and I hope that you will continue to follow the franchise, follow the work of Ridley Scott, so that in the future, perhaps we'll examine on our YouTube channel, we'll examine the new movie. So thank you so much for watching today, dear followers. I hope you will join us again, and please, if you can find time, don't forget to send a few comments to the comments that I've made for you. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing all of you again soon. So in the meantime, have a nice time in the spring in London or wherever you are, and don't forget to take care. Bye bye for now.